What would you do if your family wrote you out of existence and handed you a suitcase like a scarlet letter? My name is Sarah, and until one cold October evening, I believed loyalty was my greatest virtue. I didn't expect applause, but I never saw the knife coming, delivered not with rage, but eerie calm. Over dinner, my father made a declaration that shattered everything I thought I knew about blood, love, and belonging. No shouting, no warning, just silence and a suitcase. Let me tell you how I became a ghost in my own family story, and why I won't rest until they regret ever cutting me out. I should have known something was wrong when my father asked to have dinner as a whole family. His words, not mine. That never happened unless someone died or got engaged, and no one had, yet. The house smelled like rosemary lamb and cold politeness. My mother had set the table with a wedding china she claimed was too delicate for every day. But tonight, everything gleamed. Polished forks, crystal glasses, and silence. Across from me sat my older sister, Margaret, poised as ever in her ivory blouse, her French twist so tight it could have drawn blood. She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she traced invisible lines on her napkin like it might spell out an escape route. My mother, Judith, passed the carrots with mechanical grace. "Eat while it's hot," she said, her voice bright but brittle. Then came the lamb. Then came the wine. Then came the sentence that cleaved my world in half. "We've made a decision," my father said, placing his fork down with surgical precision. "You are no longer a beneficiary of this family estate." At first, I didn't react. I thought I'd misheard. Who even speaks like that? My hands paused over the gravy boat. "I'm sorry?" He didn't repeat himself, just continued slicing his lamb, unfazed. "It's finalized. Legally. Your mother and I agree it's best." There was no emotion in his voice, no anger, no sorrow, just cold finality, like announcing a weather report, a storm passing that no one bothered to prepare me for. Margaret stood, wordlessly. She disappeared into the hallway and returned with a suitcase, my old blue Samsonite from college. It was set beside my chair like an offering. "You've made your choice," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. Indifferent. I blinked. "What choice?" No one answered. I looked to my mother, Judith, who once sewed my ballet costumes and kissed skinned knees with opera music playing in the background. Her lips were pursed, hands folded neatly on the table. "You said family dinners meant something," I managed, my voice cracking. "You said they were sacred?" She didn't flinch. "Don't be dramatic, Sarah. This is simply the result of your actions." "What actions? What did I do?" Again, silence. I rose, pushing the chair back with a scrape. My eyes stung, but I wouldn't give them tears. Not yet. "So this is it? You're just cutting me out? We're not discussing this," my father said, sipping his wine like we were debating property taxes. "Not my existence." Margaret stepped back, her eyes never leaving the centerpiece. "The suitcase has everything you'll need for now." I opened it later, in the back seat of my rusting Corolla. Inside, a few sweaters, a folder labeled documents, and my baby blanket, worn soft and pale yellow, as if that one piece of mercy could undo the violence of being erased. That night, I sat in a motel room 2 towns over, staring at the floral wallpaper and wondering when I stopped being a daughter. There was no warning, no ultimatum, just goodbye, and not a single one of them looked back. Motel soap doesn't lather properly. That's something you don't think about until you're standing in a pale blue shower stall with trembling hands, trying to scrub off betrayal like it's a stain. 3 days after the dinner, I was still in the motel, room 214, queen bed, wallpaper peeling in one corner. The manager, Mr. Patel, had offered me a weekly rate when I paid in cash and didn't ask questions. I was grateful for the silence. I didn't cry, not in the ways you'd expect. No sobbing into pillows or dramatic, wine-fueled meltdowns. Just this eerie stillness. Like my body knew if I broke even a little, I might never stop. I didn't know what they meant by my actions, so I started digging. The folder Margaret slipped into the suitcase contained only basics. birth certificate, expired passport, and a note on lawyer letterhead I'd never seen before. It read, "As per the revised trust structure dated September 2nd. September 2nd? That was 3 weeks before the dinner. They had decided, drafted papers, signed documents, removed me from everything without a word, and then invited me to dinner like nothing had changed." I took my phone, walked down to the motel lobby, and used their communal desktop. It was painfully slow but functional. I logged into the county court record system, something I remembered from my time temping at a law office one summer. I searched my full name. Nothing at first. Then I added trustee, and there it was. A case number. Probate court. My heart dropped. The document had been filed by a law firm I didn't recognize, one that specialized in estate restructuring. It stated that due to a change in familial dynamics, Sarah Ann Whitaker was no longer listed as a successor trustee or beneficiary in the Whitaker Family Holdings LLC. That included the 2 residential properties, the brokerage portfolio, and a private family trust established in 1998, ironically, the year I graduated middle school. The reasoning? Irreconcilable values. I stared at those words, my pulse roaring in my ears. Irreconcilable values, not fraud, not betrayal, just a vague, soulless phrase designed to erase me politely. But the thing that kept ringing in my skull was the timeline. They'd filed this 3 weeks before sitting me down over lamb and pretending I was still part of them. 3 weeks before they watched me pass the gravy with shaking hands and said nothing about the silent execution already signed and notarized. They didn't disown me over dinner. They just announced it. And the suitcase? That was theater. Closure in a box. I printed every document I could afford, 50 cents a page. I spent $12. I couldn't really spare, because somehow seeing the betrayal on paper made it feel real, tangible, something I could hold in my hands and maybe one day burn. Back in my motel room, I spread the papers across the bed. I circled the date, September 2nd. That was the same weekend I'd flown home early from a business trip to surprise my mom for her birthday. I baked her a lemon meringue pie from scratch, her favorite. She cried when I gave it to her. Said I was the only one who ever remembers the little things. She held that pie in her hands knowing I'd already been cut out of everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone clutched in one hand, and texted her a single line. "Did you know about the court filing?" No reply. I waited an hour. Then, another. Finally, a reply came. "Sarah, this is not something to discuss over text. Please understand, this was very difficult for all of us. For all of us." The words were carefully chosen. A masterclass in gaslighting. Not you, not what we did to you. No ownership, just collective discomfort, wrapped in faux empathy. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, watching headlights from the freeway sweep across the ceiling. I felt like I had died and no one had buried me. Just edited me out of the script and kept the show rolling. But here's the thing. When someone buries you alive, they forget you can still dig. They forgot I can read contracts, trace filings, connect dots. They didn't erase me, they just woke me up. The call came while I was in line at the motel vending machine, trying to decide between stale pretzels or a bag of off-brand cheese puffs. "Is this Miss Sarah Whitaker?" a firm voice asked the moment I answered. I paused, already on edge. "Speaking. Who's calling?" "This is Harold Brenner. I'm with Midwest Trust Asset Recovery. I'm contacting you regarding the pending foreclosure on a commercial property registered under Whitaker and Whitaker LLC. You are listed as the secondary signatory and co-debtor." I blinked. "I'm sorry. What property?" A paper rustled on the other end, as if he didn't quite believe my question. "The Maple Creek property, 32 South Franklin Avenue. It was co-signed under your name in 2011. Listed under the LLC your family registered that same year. You're still a listed owner of record." That name tugged at a corner of memory. Maple Creek. Wasn't that the abandoned print shop downtown? The one Dad said he'd take a chance on? Back when I was in college? "That must be a mistake," I said, suddenly aware of the other guests passing by, eyeing my expression. "I've never owned property. I was a student back then. Barely 20. Well, your name is on the legal deed, Miss Whitaker. I've confirmed it through the Recorder of Deeds office. This is not an error. I'm calling as a courtesy before initiating a formal lien notice and subsequent court action. I stepped out into the parking lot, the cold slapping me awake. Why now? Why is this coming to me now? Another pause. All previous notices were returned from the primary address listed for the LLC. We traced the secondary signatory, you, to your current mailing address on file. Motel address, correct? My stomach twisted. How did they even get that? You're telling me, I said slowly, that after cutting me off, my family left me legally tied to a failing property I didn't know I owned? I can't speak to the family matter, ma'am. I'm just informing you of the debt. The property has been in arrears for 9 months. If payments are not made or arrangements established, repossession proceedings will begin. How much? I asked, though I already knew I couldn't afford the answer. Approximately $83,000, not including legal fees or penalties. I sat down hard on the concrete curb, knees giving out. Do I have any rights as co-owner? He sighed. That depends on the operating agreement of the LLC. You'll need to consult a legal representative. After we hung up, I sat outside in the cold for another 10 minutes, the vending machine snack forgotten. I just stared at my hands. Small, shaking, pale against the winter air. In 2011, I was 19, a sophomore at Drake University. That summer, Dad said I should learn about real estate. Said I needed to build credit. He gave me a folder full of papers and said it was just a formality. Trust me, he'd said, grinning with that firm, pat-your-back kind of confidence. You're protected. It's all in the family. I was 19. I signed. And now, 14 years later, they'd cut me out of every asset, except the liability. It wasn't a mistake. It was strategy. They had stripped me from the estate after confirming I was still legally tied to a toxic property. They'd left me one thread so the weight could still hang around my neck while they walked away clean. That night, I Googled the address, 32 South Franklin. Images showed a squat brick building with boarded-up windows and graffiti tagging its rusted metal doors. There were old news articles about a zoning dispute, unpaid back taxes, and a botched lease to a vape shop that never opened. But the real kicker? One article mentioned the property was part of a development grant 5 years ago, money awarded and then mysteriously unaccounted for. The grant had been in my family's name, and my signature was on the LLC. I sat in bed, arms wrapped around my knees, staring at the images like they might blink back. Somehow, this felt worse than the dinner. At least that was emotional carnage. This was strategic, legal, designed. I was never meant to see a dime of the good, but every cent of the debt? That they made sure stuck. My family didn't just abandon me. They weaponized the paperwork. The next morning, I returned to the courthouse. The clerk at the recorder's office looked like she'd seen it all. Thick glasses, coffee permanently in hand, and a sigh heavy enough to make paperweights tremble. But when I handed her the property documents and asked about the lien status on 32 South Franklin, even she raised an eyebrow. You co-signed this back in 2011? She asked, tapping through the digital file. Yikes. That word should never be used in government offices. She turned the monitor slightly, her expression softening like she pitied me. Miss Whitaker, this building's not just in debt, it's radioactive. The screen showed a string of liens. Back taxes, failed inspection fines, a lawsuit from a former tenant who never got their business permit refunded, and an unresolved complaint from the Department of Environmental Quality. They said it was a print shop, I murmured, reading the violation. It was, she confirmed, one that stored industrial ink drums illegally in the basement. The city found leakage back in 2016. No cleanup was ever filed. So it's a contaminated property, I said numbly. Contaminated, unoccupied, and bleeding money. You're on the hook, as long as your name's on that LLC. I left the courthouse with a manila envelope of printed reports, and a weight in my chest so dense I thought it might never lift. I sat in my car in the parking garage, numb. That building wasn't just a bad investment, it was a liability time bomb, and they'd left it ticking with my name on it. I called the family's longtime accountant, Jameson Clyde. I remembered his name from tax seasons growing up. He was the one who sent polite little emails about updated spreadsheets and required signatures. When he answered, I introduced myself. There was a pause. "Sarah, I'm surprised to hear from you. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I need to know why my name is still on the Maple Creek property when everything else was stripped from me." He hesitated. "That's a question for your parents, not me." "But you filed the restructuring," I pressed. "I saw your name on the court docs." He exhaled. "Sarah, listen. I'm not proud of this. But yes, I helped draft the revised documents. I was instructed to remove you from all positive yield assets. The Whitaker residence, the vineyard shares, the accounts. But your father insisted we retain your name on the LLC tied to Maple Creek." "Why?" "I asked him that myself," Jameson said, his voice barely above a whisper. He said, and I quote, "It'll teach her what responsibility really means." She wanted independence, didn't she? I froze. Independence. That word had been thrown at me every time I dared to speak for myself. When I moved into my own apartment at 24, when I turned down working for the family firm, when I said I wanted to choose my own future. They'd called it rebellion, but I called it breathing, and this was their punishment for it. "You knew it was toxic," I said. "I did," Jameson admitted, "but I couldn't override your father's orders without causing a legal scene. He made it clear it was a family matter, a family matter." That was the phrase people used when they wanted to commit slow-motion betrayal with polite smiles. After hanging up, I drove to 32 South Franklin. I needed to see it for myself. The building looked worse in person. Crumbling bricks, busted windows, and a wooden pallet propped against the door like a flimsy barricade. A for lease sign hung crookedly on the fence, phone number scraped off. It didn't smell like ink, it smelled like rot. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, staring at the building that had quietly poisoned my name for years. My father's voice echoed in my head. "It'll teach her responsibility." He didn't mean accountability, he meant punishment. This wasn't a forgotten form or innocent oversight. It was a deliberate trap. They had removed me from everything clean, profitable, or promising, and left me chained to the corpse of a failed dream. And now, it was up to me to pay the cleanup bill. The message was clear. You want to leave? Fine, but you'll carry the weight of our failure while we smile for the Christmas card. I didn't cry. I took photos. Every angle, every violation sticker on the door, every sign of decay. I wasn't going to walk away from this wreckage. I was going to document it. Every inch. Because I was done playing the quiet one. I didn't know where else to go. Not to a bank. Not to a law firm filled with cold smiles and retainer fees I couldn't afford. I needed someone who might actually care if I sank. So I went to the one adult from my past, whoever made me believe in fairness. The person who taught me that the law wasn't just for those who could afford it. Mr. Langston. Back in high school, he was the kind of teacher who made kids care about things like zoning laws and ethics clauses. He called it real-world survival. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, but I remembered hearing he'd gone back to school and started a small law practice in town. I found the office online, Langston Legal, one room above an old bakery that smelled like burnt cinnamon. The plaque on the door read, "James Langston, Attorney at Law. Civics still matters." That part made me smile, despite everything. When I stepped inside, he was sitting at a desk littered with manila folders, typing slowly on a keyboard that looked like it had barely survived the 90s. He glanced up, eyes squinting behind thick glasses. "Can I help?" Then he paused, eyebrows lifting. "Sarah Whitaker? I wasn't sure you'd remember me," I said, suddenly nervous. He stood, offering a firm handshake. "Of course I remember. You were the one who argued that local governments should live stream school board meetings. 6 years before the pandemic made it trendy." I let out a short laugh, unexpected and sorely needed. We sat, I explained everything, methodically, carefully. The dinner, the disinheritance, the mystery property, the lien notice, the court filings, the toxic asset, the betrayal dressed in legalese. Langston listened without interruption, just nodding, occasionally scribbling notes on a yellow pad. When I finished, I exhaled. I think they left the property in my name on purpose, to pin the losses on me. It feels malicious. "It doesn't just feel that way," he said, leaning back. "It is. You believe me?" He nodded. This isn't just shady estate handling. This reeks of calculated financial sabotage. The timing, the selective disinheritance, the fact that they gave you nothing but the one asset hemorrhaging money, that's a textbook setup for asset dumping. My hands shook slightly. Hearing it aloud, labeled, confirmed, was both validating and terrifying. Can I fight it? I asked. Langston tapped his pen. If you're willing to go the distance, yes, we'd file a civil suit for malicious asset transfer. Possibly elder abuse, if your grandfather's trust was involved and his intentions were misrepresented. But we'd need paper trails, emails, documents, witnesses. I've already started documenting, I said, pulling out the folder of printouts. Court records, financial filings, property assessments. He grinned, the corners of his eyes wrinkling. Still over-prepared. I like that. We went through the documents together. He flagged terms, highlighted phrases. At one point he muttered, "They really thought you'd never look into this. They thought I'd just vanish," I said softly. Langston looked at me for a long moment. "They underestimated you, Sarah. Happens all the time with the quiet ones." Before I left, he handed me a short list. Next steps. I'll take this pro bono for now, but we'll need to move fast. We don't want them filing counterclaims or restructuring further. As I stood to go, he added, "By the way, this isn't just about money. This kind of betrayal leaves a scar. So take care of that too. You're not just fighting a lawsuit, you're reclaiming your story." Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not anger, not despair, power. I was no longer standing alone in the rubble. I had someone who saw what they did and called it by name. And that was the beginning of a war. One finally felt ready to win, Mr. Langston said to start with the filing history. So I did. In between motel breakfasts and court clerk visits, I sat at the public library, neck craned, eyes burning, combing through records most people never know exist. LLC filings, property transfers, business licenses that expired quietly and were replaced with new names that smelled like cover stories. Maple Ridge Holdings, Franklin Street Revitalization Company, Green Spruce Ventures, all registered to P.O. boxes, all tied to the same mailing address, a suite inside an office building on the other side of town. I drove there on a rainy Thursday. It wasn't a real office, just a box rental service in a strip mall between a vape shop and a tax prep chain. The man behind the counter told me he couldn't share who rented the boxes. Privacy agreement, he said, but he did confirm the name on the rental for the one I pointed to. Michael Collins, he said, double-checking the system. That name meant nothing until it did. Back at the library, I searched it. Michael Collins was listed as a managing consultant for 3 of the shell companies that appeared in the chain connected to the Maple Creek property. But here's the kicker. He was also the fiancé of my sister, Margaret. She had mentioned him once, in that bored, vaguely performative way she reserved for events she expected you to fawn over. Michael's in finance. He works in growth strategies. It's very technical. Which, in Margaret's speak, meant don't ask questions I can't answer. But suddenly, the timing made sense. They got engaged 4 months ago. Around the same time, the shell companies started rearranging assets, folding them like laundry into new, obscured hands. And here I was, stuck with the one property no one wanted to touch. I printed everything. LLC filings, registered agents, tax ID numbers, all of it, connected like spider silk. Just obscure enough to dodge casual attention, just close enough to reek of strategic misdirection. I brought it to Mr. Langston the next morning. He took one look and let out a low whistle. This is impressive and incriminating. So what does this mean? I asked. It means your sister's fiancé has been funneling family assets through shell companies, likely to reduce visible net worth, dodge taxation, and dump toxic assets on unaware parties. You. Do you think she knew? Langston looked at me. Let me put it this way. These things don't happen without dinner table conversations. I stared down at the web of names and dates. My own family had used legal tricks to vanish me. And now, the man who was about to marry into it was the architect of the whole illusion. I didn't know whether to feel betrayed or impressed. Maybe both. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a building anymore. It was about rot at the foundation. And I had just found the blueprint. I didn't expect the email. No subject line. No greeting. Just this. You don't know me, but you should. I was with Michael before Margaret. You need to see what I know. Because I think they're trying to ruin you. And he taught them how. There was an attachment. Dozens of emails. PDFs. Screenshots. And a scanned copy of an old lease agreement with a very familiar name. Maple Creek Holdings. I called Mr. Langston immediately. He told me to come over. And bring everything, he said. Don't open another word of it until I've got eyes on it. When I walked into his office 20 minutes later, the rain was still dripping from my coat sleeves, but I didn't feel it. The adrenaline burned through me like kindling. I handed over the USB. Langston plugged it in and began scrolling through the files. His eyebrows rose higher with every click. The woman's name was Claire Bennett. According to a brief bio in the signature of one email, she had been a junior accountant for one of Michael Collins' past ventures. Not one of the family shells, but something adjacent. An office space flipping company that folded after a tax audit. She was also, it turns out, his ex-fiancée. Claire's emails painted a grim picture: strategic document shredding, falsified consulting invoices, funneling money through layered entities. But the most damning piece? A forwarded message from Margaret. It was sent to Michael 6 months ago. Subject line, need your help. The message read, we need to get Sarah out of the holdings before the auditors circle back. Dad is worried about the 2016 grant trail and the property filings under her name. If anyone traces the dead money to Maple Creek, she's the one tied to it. Your shell network, can it cover this? Below that, Michael had responded, yes, move fast. Signatures only matter when someone knows they're signing away their future. She won't look that deep. She never does. Langston leaned back, the document glowing on his monitor. This changes everything. They knew, I whispered. They knew they were leaving me with the fallout. Not just that, he said. They orchestrated it. Premeditated, calculated liability transfer. And this email confirms it wasn't just negligence. It was a cover-up. There were more. PDFs of balance sheets from Margaret's accounts. Money pulled from shared holdings, laundered through Michael's entities, then reappearing in new trusts labeled under Margaret's name alone. And then there was a draft prenup, dated last month. Michael had added a clause excluding any financial obligations incurred by Margaret before marriage. In other words, once the shell game collapsed, he'd walk away clean too. Claire's final note was simple. I left him when I realized he was using me. I stayed quiet for years, but when I found out they did this to you, to protect their lies, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I'm sorry it took me this long, but you have the truth now. Use it. Mr. Langston looked at me with something between disbelief and pride. You have what people spend years trying to get in court. Intent. I stared at the monitor, the words burning into memory. They'd plotted this, built a false narrative around me, and now, the whole thing was unraveling in my hands. Let's go to court, I said softly. He smiled. Oh, we will, but not quietly. Courtrooms are colder than you'd expect. Not just the air conditioning or the marble benches, but the silence. The way people stare like they're watching a play where every word might decide someone's future. In this case, mine, and theirs. It had taken weeks of filings, discovery motions, and Langston's relentless digging, but we finally had our day. Civil court. Asset fraud and malicious transfer. They tried to delay. Their attorney argued, we were slinging family grievances disguised as legal issues. But Langston countered with one sentence I'll never forget. This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about calculated deception with a paper trail. When my father took the stand, he looked like a man who still thought control lived in his voice. Crisp suit, calm tone, like this was just another boardroom meeting. Miss Whitaker was removed from the holdings due to irreconcilable differences, he said smoothly. It was a difficult but necessary decision. Was it your idea to leave the Maple Creek property in her name? Langston asked. arms folded. It was overlooked. Langston raised one brow. Overlooked? Even after your daughter's email asking your future son-in-law to help conceal Sarah's name from any potential investigations. My father's jaw tightened. We entered the emails into evidence. The judge leaned forward, brows knitted. Do you deny knowledge of this correspondence? My father shifted. I don't recall. Would a forensic audit of your email help jog your memory? Langston asked. Quiet, sharp. That was when I looked at him. My father, a man who once taught me how to ride a bike, who watched me give a speech in high school about ethical leadership, who promised I was the future of the family legacy. He didn't meet my eyes, not once. Next came Margaret. She swept into the courtroom in a navy sheath dress, looking like a magazine cover on silent mode. She took the stand with a kind of detachment I'd once mistaken for elegance. Do you recognize this email? Langston asked, holding up a printed copy. Her gaze flicked to it. I may have sent something similar. She won't look that deep, Langston quoted. She never does. Were you referring to your sister, Sarah? Margaret hesitated. Those words were taken out of context. Do you deny that you sought help in concealing Sarah's legal ties to the Maple Creek property while removing her from all profitable assets? No further questions, Your Honor, Langston said, letting her squirm in the silence that followed. Finally, I was called. I stepped up to the witness stand, palms damp but steady. I spoke slowly, clearly, laying out everything. The dinner, the erased filings, the foreclosure notice, the shell companies, the discovery of the emails. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked at me. Ms. Whitaker, what do you want the court to do? I took a breath. I want what's fair. Restitution for the damage. Removal from the property. An acknowledgement that I was framed to protect everyone else's financial secrets. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. Because I finally had proof. And for once, they had nothing to say. When the judge ruled that day, she used the word restitution. She ordered a full financial audit of the family's trust and holdings. She ordered damages to be paid. She mandated my removal from the property deed. But what I'll never forget, as the gavel struck, my father still wouldn't look at me. He just stood there, stone-faced, defeated, like a man watching the myth of his own righteousness crumble in front of a room full of witnesses. And I just stood taller. Because I hadn't just won. I'd told the truth, and they couldn't bury it this time. You'd think the courtroom would empty out quickly after a ruling like that. But no, people lingered. Reporters whispered in corners. Attorneys huddled by the benches, and my family sat frozen in their row, like mannequins left behind in a store window. I stepped down from the witness stand, walking slowly past them. Margaret stared at the judge's desk, jaw clenched. Her fingers toyed with the strap of her handbag, like she was plotting something. My mother rose first. Judith Whitaker, ever the hostess, even now. She smoothed the collar of her coat, lifted her chin, and turned to me, not with anger, but with a quiet disgust that settled in my stomach like lead. You always were too sensitive, she said. Not, I'm sorry, not, we went too far, just that. Too sensitive. I was loyal, I replied, voice steady, and I trusted you. She gave a small laugh. Trust isn't the same as obedience, Sarah. You made things difficult, always second-guessing, always needing explanations. That's not how families function. Families don't function by setting traps, I snapped, louder than I intended. They don't hide lawsuits and dump toxic assets on each other. Perhaps if you hadn't insisted on being the, quote, independent daughter, she replied, using air quotes like a dagger, you wouldn't have found yourself in this position. Independence, the word again, used like an insult. My crime, apparently, was not needing them enough to be controlled. I found myself in this position, I said slowly, because you decided that preserving your secrets was more important than protecting your child. My father remained silent. He gathered his papers without a word, still refusing to look at me. But, Margaret? She stood up, heels clicking sharply as she stepped toward me. You humiliated us, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You couldn't let it go. You always have to make things harder than they need to be. I defended myself, I said. That's not humiliation. That's survival. She laughed bitterly. You think you've won? This isn't over, Sarah. You may have embarrassed us in court, but people have short memories. And I promise you, when this family rebuilds, you'll still be on the outside. I met her glare without flinching. Then I hope it's cold out there, because I'm not coming back in. Margaret leaned in close, voice sharp enough to draw blood. You've ruined everything. No, I said. You did that when you chose silence and strategy over love. She stared at me one last time, then walked away, her heels stabbing the tile with each step. My mother followed, not sparing me another glance. And my father? He paused at the courtroom doors, just for a second. I thought maybe he'd turn, maybe he'd say something, anything. But he didn't. He just walked out. And that was the moment I finally accepted what I'd known for weeks. They weren't sorry. They were only sorry I didn't stay silent. The fall of the Whitaker name didn't happen all at once. No, it crumbled in waves. Public filings, suspension notices, whispers at charity galas. A bankruptcy alert triggered a local news headline. Prominent family faces legal reckoning over asset disputes. The accompanying photo showed Margaret storming out of the courthouse, lips tight, sunglasses failing to hide the fury in her eyes. The Vineyard shares vanished. Their brokerage accounts were frozen under court review. And the family business, once a polished legacy firm operating under a veneer of tradition, lost its operating license pending investigation into fraudulent asset restructuring. Langston sent me a single sentence in an email. They called it legacy. Turns out it was just paperwork hiding rot. Meanwhile, Maple Creek sat exactly where they'd left it, decaying on the corner of South Franklin, boarded and forgotten. Except now it was mine, not as punishment, as restitution. At first, I wanted to sell it, burn it even. But Langston said something that stuck with me. You don't have to make it what they wanted. You can make it yours. So I walked through the building again, this time with a city inspector and a local architect. We wore masks to keep from inhaling mildew. I kept a journal of everything wrong. The cracked beams, the stained walls, the half-finished drywall that reeked of abandonment. And slowly, an idea took shape. The structure was salvageable. The zoning, flexible. The city offered incentives for community-based redevelopment. I spent nights sketching notes, making calls, building a case not for profit, but for purpose. What if I turned the ruin they gave me into shelter? Not just metaphorically. What if it became a women's center? A place for those discarded, displaced, erased, like I had been. 6 months later, the permits were approved. Langston helped me file the paperwork to turn Maple Creek into a registered nonprofit entity. I partnered with 2 advocacy groups, both stunned that I didn't want investors, just builders who believed in the mission. We named it The Hearth, not fancy, but warm, safe. A place to start over when everything else collapses. Word spread slowly, then quickly. A former high school teacher donated books. An old college friend designed the mural for the front. Volunteers showed up, some curious, others quietly desperate for redemption of their own. And through it all, I stayed silent about what the building used to represent. Because now, it didn't belong to the Whitakers anymore. It belonged to something better. One afternoon, as drywall dust floated through sunlight in the front room, a volunteer tapped my shoulder. There's a woman here asking for you. Said her name is Judith. I stepped outside. There she stood. My mother, impeccably dressed but thinner, older, somehow. Like the weight of her pride had finally settled across her shoulders. I heard what you did, she said. With the building. I nodded. It's called The Hearth. It's noble, she murmured. I thought you'd sell it. Of course you did. She looked away. I suppose you expect an apology. No, I said. I expect nothing. She flinched. I stepped past her toward the door, hand on the knob. Sarah, she called softly, the first crack in her voice I'd heard in years. I turned, but only halfway. You always were good, she whispered. Better than us? I nodded. I know. Then I walked inside, and I didn't look back. Opening day at the Hearth didn't have ribbon-cutting fanfare or a line of cameras, just warmth. A kettle simmered in the break room. Laughter from the back, where a few women were painting shelves. A child traced drawings on the waiting room wall, aloud, even encouraged. And I stood by the front window, watching the sun hit the old bricks just right. For the first time in years, they didn't look broken, they looked honest. That morning, I found an envelope slipped through the front door slot. No return address. Inside, a note in Margaret's handwriting. You win. For now. No signature. Just bitterness folded in paper. I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about winning anymore. Let them keep their resentment, their cold dinners and legacy obsessions. I had something else now. Rooms filled with women finding their feet again. Walls scrubbed clean and repainted in shades of hope. A new family, not of blood, but of belief. Sometimes people ask me if I miss them. The answer is no. I miss the illusion, the comfort of thinking love was guaranteed. But once that spell broke, I didn't want the lie back. I wanted truth. And I built it. Every tile laid, every door unlocked, every story shared in these halls is proof. I wasn't the burden they claimed. I was the backbone they underestimated. And now I walk forward, not in revenge, but in peace. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild after someone tried to break you? And if you haven't yet, trust this. Your quiet power is louder than you think. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the people who hand you a suitcase are handing you your freedom.